In this video, I'm going to show you how you can combine a 3D printer and a UV printer to make some really nice, beautiful flowers. And today, we're going to make a yellow tulip. So the first thing we need to do is to generate our tulip images. Now for that, I actually used ChatGPT. And I had ChatGPT make a picture of a flat yellow tulip petal. Tulips generally have 6 petals and 2 layers of 3. So what I had it do next was then to array that flat petal as in a circle with touching in the center and make it have rotational symmetry, just to make it easier to assemble later. Once I liked the petal structure, I had it generate a couple of different options for the stamen. There's usually about 6 stamens per tulip. So I had 3 different ones to choose from. I ended up choosing to use these bottom 2 because they were a little bit thicker and would give a little bit more structure to the flower. And then I had it do a pistile and had it straighten it out a little to make it easier to work with and edit the colors a bit. And then I had it work on the leaves. Sort of took a few tries to get them to look flat. But once I had everything that I was happy with, I downloaded and exported all my images, tried a couple of different colors so I can make some other tulips later. But overall, at this point, we're ready to go. So the next thing we need to do actually is to generate the 3D printing files from these images. And there's a lot of different ways to do this. I found one of the easiest ways is actually to use xTool Studio to generate SVGs in the shape of those files. So I've opened up xTool Studio here. And so the next thing I need to do is to import the images. So we can start with the petals. I'm going to bring that in. And what I want to do first, though, is get rid of the background. So I'm just going to actually use the AI cutout. It's one of the features of xTool Studio. It does use a couple of credits, but the credits are actually relatively inexpensive, and it's easy to get new ones. I like the way it did that here, so I'm just going to hit confirm. And then the next thing I need to do is to kind of scale it to the size that I want to have a petal. So I think I'm going to actually go with probably about 130 millimeters, but it might, as the height for this image, but it might actually be a little bit easier for me to actually first crop this and get rid of all that extra background space. So I'm going to use the Studio Crop function, and I'm just going to bring the sliders over as close to the petal without touching as I can. Okay. Here we go. And here, it still might actually be a little bit big for a pet. I want it to be somewhat close to a life size, so let's try 100 instead. Yeah, that'll probably make a little more sense. So each petal will be about a little under 5 centimeters tall. All right, so the next thing I need to do here, so this is a PNG file. I can't really print from a PNG file, but I can create a 3D print from an SVG. So the way I'm going to create the SVG of that shape is actually really simple to do in xTool Studio. So I'm going to choose offset. This is going to create an outline of the shape. I actually want it to be the exact same size. So my offset is going to be 0, and I only want to offset the outer shape. I'm going to hit confirm. Now it's a little bit hard to see, but now I'm pulling it out. You can see that offset. I'm actually going to set it to engrave just to get it to fill it in. And then I'm going to export this as an SVG. And I'm going to call it tulip petals.svg. And I'm going to be able to use that in my 3D printing software to generate 3D prints of this shape. And then I'm going to repeat the process with all of the other parts of the tulip. I'm not going to make you watch me do it over and over again here, so I'll just show you what it'll look like at the end. So here I've got my petals, I've got my stamens, I've got my pistile, and I've got my leaf. And then I'm going to pull all of these SVGs that I've created and then exported into my 3D printing software. The other thing I'm going to do, just to make sure that the things in my 3D printing software and in my UV printer software sort of match and are the same size, I'm actually going to export these cleaned up images that are scaled and cropped and remove the background as SVGs as well. So here I'm going to export this as an SVG. I'm going to name this one Tulip Petals to UV Print. just to make sure I don't get confused from which is which. And I'm going to repeat that process with all of these. All right, so now that we have our SVGs of all the shapes colored and blank, it's time to open up our 3D printing software. So to do that here, and I've sort of done this already, but I just want to show you what the process is by opening a new plate. I'm going to use my Bamboo Lab X1C printer. I've loaded up a transparent PETG because I want to be able to see the UV print from both sides. And now I'm going to generate the 3D printable files from these SVGs. So first I'm going to import an SVG. So I'm going to bring it on to the plate. I want to leave the X and Y dimensions the same, but I actually want this to be a very, very, very thin print because I need it to be flexible and I really want to be able to really see the UV print. That is really the main part of this project, but the 3D print just sort of being a substrate to give it a little bit of structure. So I'm going to click on resize. I'm going to make sure that uniform scale is unchecked, and I'm going to only change the height or the Z measurement. In this particular case, I'm going to be printing this really, really thin. I'm using a 0.16 millimeter layer height with Arachne wall generator just to make sure I get the nice contours that I want. And because I want it to be a solid surface and a really thin print and transparent for it to UV print on, I'm actually going to use 100% infill, which requires you to use the rectilinear infill pattern. And then I'm going to change my Z height to just be 2 layers. So it's a 0.16 layer height. So that's going to be 0.32 millimeters. And that's going to be my new 3D printable file. Now, I'm going to make sure that I set this to the right filament because I've got a couple of different ones loaded in the printer. So this is going to be on my transparent Bamboo PETG. And because I need 2 layers of this, I'm actually going to make a copy. And then I'm going to go through the same process for the leaves, the stamens, and the pistile. So I'm going to need 6 stamens and 1 pistile and 2 leaves for every tulip and 2 sets of petals. And so that's sort of what I've done here. In this case, I actually generated 6 of each type of stamen so I can see which one looks better and decide what I'm going to use as I assemble. And they're all the same height. I went through the same process, pulled in the SVG, changed the height to 0.32, made the copies that I needed, and then I had it auto-arrange them on the plate so they would all fit there well. And then I can slice the plate and send it to the printer. All right, so I've actually already sliced this plate and sent it, and it's printing now. And we can see the progress. Oh, it looks like it's just about done. Perfect. All right, I'm gonna go downstairs and grab my prints, and I'll be right back. All right, let's pull out our prints. So actually what you can see what I did here is I actually printed them on this sort of holographic plate to kind of give them this cool like holographic imagery, which I thought might be kind of fun to see how it plays out with the UV. All right, they look good. Let's peel them off and then we'll get ready to UV print. And check out, you can actually see that sort of see that kind of holographic color effect. I'm going to pull these off really carefully because they are quite thin and therefore kind of fragile. All right, so I'll get the rest of these ready and I'll meet you at the UV printer. So as you can see here, I've laid my 3D prints down on my UV printer's mat. This is actually a silicone sheet I put on top of the mat just to protect it. And I just want to sort of show you here, maybe a little bit easier to see over the gray background, that sort of holographic effect you can get on the PETG from printing it on that here, from printing it on that built plate. Now I'm actually going to put these on the UV printing plate with the holographic smoother side down so that I can have that kind of effect show through the UV print. All right, everything's set up. It's time to hit my UV printing software and get things started. All right, so I've loaded up my UV printer software. Took a snapshot of the UV printer plate so I can see all my prints. I've pulled in all those SVG files we created earlier into my UV printing software, and I'm lining up the colored SVG files on top of the 3D prints. So to do this, I find it really helpful to use the opacity to adjust it, sort of make your picture a little bit see-through so I can see what's on the build plate behind it. And so this is, you gotta have some patience here and sort of do this really carefully and slowly, just to make sure that your stuff lines up well. You really do want these images to look good. You're gonna make very small adjustments, a little bit, some small rotations until it looks like they are lined up and where they should be. You may have to make some small changes in the size just in case, you know, there might have been some expansion on the 3D print, or things might not have exported exactly the way you thought they did. And so you just want to just sort of slowly and steadily just sort of get them lined up as best you can. Might need to rotate this all the way that way. Let's see. Just to get this to line up. Might make it just a little bit bigger. The pitch, you probably did expand a tiny bit. All right, there we go. Now I just have to remember to bring the opacity up. And I'm just gonna make sure I brought all the opacities up so that I don't lose any of my prints. I think I need to adjust this just a tiny bit more. And all right, I think that will be okay. All right. So let me just now make sure. You just want to, and you see I've done all these others. It takes some time, it's a little bit tedious, but it's worth the effort just to make sure you get a great print. So now let me make sure that I've set all of their opacities back to 100%. Perfect. Now it's time to talk about the print settings. So in this case, what we're actually going to do is it's just going to be one layer of CMYK followed by one layer of gloss, because I want it to be able to show on both sides of the Petchi, so I'm not using a white underlayer, and I want it to have a little bit of a glossy finish, so I'm putting gloss on top. It will have that glossy finish on the bottom as well, just from the bottom of the Petchi. All right, so I have all my settings and I'm all ready to go, and let's send everything to the printer. And I know that some things are transparent because we got rid of the background, so we can just ignore this. I'm going to ignore this too because I know that I have enough gloss left to finish this print. I do have a replacement cartridge ready just in case. All right, it can take a couple minutes for the file to go to my printer. So just wait, it'll happen. And then it'll show us also how much ink we're going to need and how long we think this print will take. As you'll notice, I tried to bunch everything as close as possible on the printer because that does speed it up a little bit, because then the print head and the bed have less movement to do. So that's just a hint for when you get your UV printer. All right, we're almost there. And it should be, here we go. All right, so this is telling me that that it's gonna take about 11 minutes. I'm gonna use, all told, just about 2 milliliters of ink altogether, so not bad at all. You notice there still is some white here because there is some white in the images themselves, especially towards the center of the petals. All right, we'll send this to the printer and I'll meet you when it's done. All right, my prints are done and they look great. There's a little bit of a misalignment here at the edges. So there's a little bit of a sort of parallax on the camera towards the edges, but I do think I have enough that look good that we can get going. All right, so I'm gonna very carefully peel these off of the silicone. There we go. So I will say, if you wanted to make a flower like this and you don't have a 3D printer, you actually can print with the UV ink directly onto the silicone mat and it will peel off. As you can see here, you can really sort of peel the ink off the silicone because very little actually sticks to silicone. I'll show you how to do that in just a second with some of these oversprays. If you are going to do that though, you're going to have to adjust your print settings, and instead of doing just CMYK and gloss, you'll actually want to do a layer of gloss, a layer of CMYK, 6 layers of white in between to give it a little bit of thickness and structure, and then another layer of CMYK and another layer of gloss. And then you could actually just use the UV printer ink to make the flower. Right, we've got a bunch of overspray here because of the slight misalignment, but we'll pick the best looking stamens and we'll build our flower. All right, so let me move these over to the side, and then I'll show you what I mean by being able to just peel, sorry about that, to just peel the UV ink off of the silicone. So if you see here, if you bend the mat, the ink itself actually just peels off. Now these are really thin, so they're ripping, which is why if you were going to do it with just the UV ink and not, have a 3D printed base, you want to add those layers of white in between to give it a little bit more thickness and structure. All right, now that we have all of our pieces, it's time to go and put our flower together. All right, now it's time to assemble our tulip. So the first thing I have to do is to glue the parts together. So I'm actually using here some floral wire. It's nice and flexible, but has some good stiffness to it. And it's green, which is helpful when you're making a flower. So I'm just gonna cut a short piece. And I'm gonna take this stamen, and I'm gonna look for this side that's a little bit rougher, so the slightly less smooth side, or the top of the print. And I'm just gonna take a little bit of CA glue, and you can also use a glue gun. Pretty much any glue that dries clear and will stick to pitchy in the wire. And you're just going to put a little small amount and then glue the floral wire onto it. Just hold it there for a second to let it set, and then it'll need a minute or two to fully dry. Let's see if I can zoom in and show you what it looks like. A little too zoomed in. There we go. Here. There. Okay. So I'm gonna let that dry for a sec. You can see I've already done a bunch of them over here. And so let me bring this up so you can see how it's sort of glued on right there. And the nice thing about the CA glue is that it's pretty thin and it dries very clear. All right, let's do this other stamen. And again, I did print some spares, which will come in handy, I'm sure. And you don't really have to, you don't need the floral wire to be that long for this part, but it's always much easier to shorten than it is to add. So I would always cut a little longer than you think you're gonna need, just in case. Okay. Now we've got the pistile. See that right here? And I've got a little bit of parchment paper underneath, just to protect my work surface from the CA glue, and I'm wearing gloves because it's really not so much fun to glue your fingers together. But if you ever do glue your fingers together, a really simple solution to that is actually some acetone. It'll dissolve the glue and free your fingers right up. I'm gonna pull off this little stringing of the glue. All right, let's let that dry. Now let's onto the leaves. So actually, now that it has the UV print on it, you can actually see the holographic effect much better. Sort of turning it here. It's a little bit hard to see on camera, but it actually looks pretty cool in real life. All right, so the leaves are going to need a slightly longer length of floral wire because they'll be coming up from the bottom of the stem. So it's going to be the same process. Some glue and a whole lot of patience. This is definitely not a project you want to do when you're in a rush. Now, if you really didn't want the wire to show at all on the leaves, it's not really going to show on the stamens because those are going to be inside the tulip. What you could actually do is print 4 leaves and then just sandwich the wire in between them like that. And then you wouldn't see it. The wire would get hidden between the 2 layers of leaves. The nice thing about this is that it is green, the wire, so it shouldn't be too bad. And if I don't like the way it looks, I've got some floral tape here that we can wrap around the connection to hide it. And this is actually my first time using floral wire and floral tape. It was recommended by some commenters on a Facebook post I did when I made some tiger lilies using just the UV ink. And it was actually a great recommendation. So I do want to say thank you to all of you who recommended it. Cut my wire. All right, so now for the tulip petals, we're actually going to do something a little bit different. So you see I've got my 6 petals together, the 2 layers. I want to make sure this sort of shiny holographic layer is on the outside for both. So here we go. And you'll see that because they're symmetrical, I just have to rotate them on top of each other, and I'll have that 6 petal structure that I'm then going to curl up with the heating iron. So for this, I actually just have to glue these to each other, which is a lot easier than gluing wires. So I'm just going to take and you see I've got this sort of shiny side up. It has a little bit of that holographic appearance. Just going to put a little bit of glue right in the center. And I'm going to take the other petal, rotate it 180 degrees on top of it, and glue them together. Sort of center that as best I can. That looks pretty good. All right. Okay, now we're going to wait a little bit for all of these to dry, and I'll be right back. All right, so my parts are dry, and it's time to put them together. So the first thing I need to do actually is to make a little hole in the center of the petals to be able to push the stamens and the pistil through. So to do that, I'm actually going to take this little awl here and just very carefully and slowly punch a hole right through the middle. It doesn't need to be very big. It does, though, need to go through. Okay. There we are. We're coming through the other side. Make sure I'll have enough room for all of my parts. And I think, there we go. All right. I think that'll do it. Ooh, the glue was not as dry as I thought it was. Hold on. Let me line that right back up. All right. There we go. Okay. Let me make sure my hole is still centered between the 2 pieces. Yep. There we are. All right. Let me put that down and let it dry for another minute. So now what we'll do is we're going to stick the stamens and the pistils through the center of the tulip. So I've chosen the 6 stamens that I think came out the best, and we can get started. So I'll start with the pistile. I'm going to send that right through the hole we made. And then we're going to do the same thing for the 6 stamens. Now, I will say that if you do make this flower just using the UV ink and not using the 3D printed base, you could actually just use like a thin acupuncture needle to cut through the UV ink. It's much, much thinner than the Petchy. Okay. Get 3 on this side of this pistile. I might need to, no, there we go. It's going to be a little bit of a tight fit, but that's actually what I want. I don't want there to be a lot of wiggle room. I don't want things to be shaking around. Just pull that out from this side. Okay, so 1 more stamen to go. Okay, so now I've got my pistil, my 3 stamens in the center. Okay, and what I'm going to do here is twist these together. Okay. There we are. And let me see if I want to add a stem wire to this to make this a little bit longer. I am planning to put this tulip in this 3D printed vase here. So let's see how this will fit. All right, I probably will need to make this a little bit longer by adding some stem wire, but we will do that at the end. All right. So now here's the fun part. We're going to curl the tulip petals to make it look like an actual tulip. And the way we're going to do that is actually using a heat gun. So just be careful because these do get pretty hot, but you actually don't need a lot of heat. It's really just going to be a very low amount of heat, just enough to curl the petals. All right. Let me plug that in and let it charge up, and I'll be back in a second. All right, so my heat gun is all charged up, and it's time to bend the petals. I'm going to wear some somewhat heat-proof gloves for this, just to protect myself. All right, so we're just going to put it on a very low heat. And sort of do this very slowly and very carefully. It really doesn't take that much effort to make this a little more flexible and malleable. You just want to heat the plastic up a little bit, and then it'll become bendable and shapeable. Don't overdo it because you don't really want it to completely melt on you. Just start with this inner layer of petals. Curl it up, just very gently and very carefully curl the petals up until you have the shape you're looking for. Apply heat and curl. And just repeat as you go around the tulip. Heat, curl, heat and curl. You're really just curling it up with your fingers. Just very carefully and very slowly and gently. I'm going to turn off the heat for a second and continue curling and shaping them until I have the tulip that I want. And if it starts to get too stiff again, just apply a little bit more heat. And again, you want to do this slowly and carefully so you don't overly bend them or melt the plastic too much. Okay. Now what might actually be kind of cool is if I ever got a vacuum press to be able to create a form that I can then melt and shape to the petals around. That would be fun. So maybe that'll be my next adventure. All right, so I'm just going to continue slowly and carefully shaping. I think I need to add a little bit of dab of glue between the two layers because they are separating a little. And actually do that with the glue gun. Or maybe, while I have the opportunity, I will actually first lower the bottom layer and shape the top one independently for a second. Okay, I think that looks pretty good for the top. Let's slide the lower petal layer back on. Twist this a little tighter together to get it to go through. There you go. Now I'm going to just put a tiny little dab of glue in between so we can hold them together. Slide that up to where I need it. Okay. And now we can finish shaping the bottom layer, and I think we've almost got it. All right. It's a nice looking tulip, I think. And obviously I could always play around with it and shape it a bit more. But I think we're okay for right now. All right, so I can set the heat gun aside for a second. So the next thing we now need to do is sort of clean this up a little bit on the back with some floral tape. Okay. So I'm going to grab my floral tape. Let's cut myself a little piece here. I'm going to stretch it out to make it sticky. Oh, stretch that out a little too much there. Okay. So wrap it around here a little bit just to clean this twisting up a bit. Make it slightly of a thicker roll here towards the top just to prevent the petals from sliding down if they get separated again. Just going to continue wrapping. Okay. All right. Now I do need to make this just a little bit longer so that it will fit nicely in my vase. So I'm going to grab another piece here of my floral wire. And I'm going to twist that together. Continue twisting. Nice and tightly wrapped. Okay. Now I want to add my leaves. Now I've got my tulip and my leaf. I'm going to zoom out a little bit so you can see what I'm doing. So now I'm going to sort of pick the height at which I want this leaf to be. I think that looks okay, right about there. And I'm going to twist the wire around together to join them. Got a whole lot of wire sitting here. Let me bring in this other leaf. Twist, twist. Continue twisting to keep everything together. I can kind of hear my father singing in the background, "Let's twist again, like we did last summer." But yeah, we're just gonna keep twisting this wire to put it together. Okay, and now to neaten things up a little, I'm gonna wrap some floral tape around the base where the leaves meet. And make sure my stem stays in between the two leaves here. And if there are any florists out there who have some recommendations of how this could be done better, I'd love to hear it. Okay. Just gonna throw a little more floral tape around the rest of the stem, just to hold it together. All right, lots and lots of wrapping. This is not exactly what I would call a quick project, but it is a lot of fun, and I think the results are kind of nice, and it's just a lot of fun just to explore what you can do with the UV printing technology and when you're combining it with other tech like 3D printing. All right, let's see if I need to go any longer or if I will fit into my vase now. I think that should actually fit. So I think what I could just do here is curl these up just to make it sure that it will stand up in the vase. All right, we're almost done. So the last thing we can do, actually, if we want, is we can curl the leaves a little bit. And I think I will, just a little, just to make them look a little bit more natural. All right, coming back to my heat gun. This really just takes a little bit of curl. I want just a tiny bit. There we go. And not staying curled. I'm just gonna turn off the heat and hold that shape for a sec. There we go. Just a tiny bit of curl there. And let's do the other side. Here's my tulip. Let's put that in a vase. All right, give me a second. I'll grab a nice picture for all of you to see. And here we are. This is my 3D and UV printed tulip. Thanks for watching, and I'd love to hear what you think I should try next. See you next time.